Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Today's episode is ADU Advantage.
Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast with Scott Whitwam, your blueprint to financial abundance. Settle in as we explore the mindset and methods for wealth building through real estate.
Welcome back. I'm Scott Whitwam, and today we're going to be talking about ADU Advantage. First off, what is an ADU? An ADU is an additional dwelling unit. And as an investor, these can add some significant value to our projects. Of course, we're talking on the residential single-family side of investing right now, but ADUs have become very popular with many jurisdictions. I remember, 30 years ago, when if you wanted to build an additional, we'll call it an additional dwelling unit, you wanted to build an additional building on your property, you wanted to provide a mother-in-law suite, whatever you wanted to call it. 30 years ago, jurisdictions were very opposed to it. Most of the jurisdictions in the major metropolitan areas had very restrictive lot usage, lot coverages, setbacks, and I mean, you could do it, but it was a much more difficult process. But now with what we have are calling a shortage in housing, which we really, believe it or not, this is really the effects of our 2008 real estate crash. When we took 4 or 5 years where builders quit building, it really put us behind an 8 ball that we've never really recovered from. And we do have a housing shortage in the United States. And so I want to talk about how an ADU can do a couple different things. It can help with the housing shortage, and it can help our real estate investing. So let's just go with my first point here is, so why, as a real estate investors, do I care about ADUs? Well, first off, it can give you more lot coverage, which is more usable or rentable or sellable square footage on a property than what you may be able to do by just doing an addition to the house. And also, these ADUs, a lot of jurisdictions now are allowing them to be attached ADUs. Some jurisdictions, it used to be they had to be detached. And so you're going to have to do some research in your area. In the areas that I work in, attached ADUs seem to be an easier fit. But now, we're getting a lot more allowances for attached ones. But they can add to it. So let's just say that you're a buy and hold investor, and you have a property, a lot that's 6,500 square feet, and you've got enough room to add another, 500 to 1,000 square foot additional dwelling unit, something that has a mini kitchen in it, it's got a bathroom in it. A lot of times these ADUs are just a studio, but also you can also have one that has a living room, a laundry room, and a bedroom. So that people can take advantage of a full living space. And even with the rise of things like, the Airbnb market, where you're renting out your main house. But now if you have an ADU, you actually have 2 rental properties. You could rent the ADU separate, or you can rent them together. So let's just say that you were getting, $2,000 a week for the main house. Maybe you can get $1,000 a week more for the ADU, or do $2,500 for the combination if you had a big group that is together. So on the rental side, it can help to maximize your return on the utilization of your property. If you're working in the co-living space, like with pad split or co-homing a property, where you have individual tenants, an ADU becomes a premium space. And in some jurisdictions, like in the Phoenix area, I know people that are taking those ADUs, which are really meant to be a single unit for a single occupant, and they're finding ways to actually take a 700 square foot ADU and make 2 bedrooms out of it. So you have 2 bedrooms, a shared kitchen space, shared bathroom facilities, and 2 tenants in there. And it'll enhance or maximize the amount of return on investment as a buy and hold investor. So I think that looking at ADUs on all of our properties can be a real advantage in our buy and hold applications. But what about the buy and flip applications? Now, additional dwelling units, generally when they're detached, the square footage in most markets are going to be of a little bit lesser value than the main living or the main dwelling area of the property. But in many times, if they're attached, if it's an attached ADU, it maintains the same price per square foot. And obviously, depending on where you're at in the country, Southern California can easily be $400 or $500 a square foot. In my marketplace, it's easy to see 175 to 225 a square foot, and in other jurisdictions it may be a little bit less. Like in Florida, there's still some areas you can pick up between 150 and $200 a square foot, but it is an advantage. So if I have a property and I'm looking to make it some additional value on the property, maybe I take a attached storage area on a property and I convert that now into living space by making an additional dwelling unit. If I can find a way to put an additional bathroom in it, a mini kitchen in it, and especially if it has a separate entry, then it can be a complete its own dwelling unit and add considerable value to my resale of my flip. And so I think there's some real good reasons why we want to do that. My second point would be an ADU gives a investor some flexibility. So let's just say you're a house hacker. Maybe you move into a house, you remodel it, and then your plan is a 2 to 5 year selling period, so you avoid capital gains tax on your gain because it's become your primary resident. But if you put in an ADU, you may be able to now have some rental income while you're house hacking. And, there are many house hacks. I mean, a lot of times our investors, when they're getting started, they'll take the master suite and they'll rent out the other couple bedrooms in the house. And if you could get an ADU, that's additional revenue while you're enhancing the property, and then you get your 2 to 5 year plan fulfilled, sell the property, and you make the additional profit on your sale because now you've got additional square footage added to the house. So an ADU gives you some flexibility. I mean, you could actually do a nice ADU if you're a single person, or maybe it's just you and your spouse or whatever, and you guys move into the ADU. Remodel the house, make either the house, pad split it, co-live it, turn it into an Airbnb. You live in the ADU, you wait your 2 years, it's your principal resident, then you go buy a primary residence and then turn the ADU into a rental space. I mean, there's all these different, avenues that you can get to. It gives you some flexibility. If you're a landlord, there's a lot of flexibility because now you basically have 2 rentals. I mean, in the old days, we had 2 rentals on a property. We called it a duplex property. But in this case, you could have an ADU that you could use when you have guests in town. You can use it for family members. Maybe it does become a mother-in-law suite, and then you rent out the main house. So an additional dwelling unit, these ADUs can give you some additional flexibility with a property to become more profitable in your ownership. It doesn't matter whether you're flipping it or whether you're holding on to it. My third point, too, is, and I touched on it a little bit in the beginning, is with additional dwelling units, these ADUs, and the zoning requirements that most municipalities have converted their outlooks or their thinking on these things to help create additional space for, whether it's tenants or owners, but to help deal with the housing shortage in a lot of these communities. Some jurisdictions have made it very easy. We've got some ADUs in process right now, and they've made it much more easy in order to, with our setbacks, with the amount of zoning coverage and those type of things. So when you go down to your permitting office, or now it's almost all done online. When you're submitting your stuff to the permitting office, you're not having to make a huge case as to why this additional living space on your property makes sense. Most of the the jurisdictions understand it and they have a process in place for it, and you can take advantage of it. My fourth point would be the cost. Generally, the cost of doing these units are relatively less expensive than building your main dwelling unit, depending on some factors. For instance, my company here or a construction company here in Arizona, AZ Renovation, when we're looking at these things, we sit down, we meet with the owners of the property, and we talk about what their goals are. We do the same thing on our flip side of the company, but we look at what the goals are. Can we utilize maybe the power panel that exists and then just do a sub panel for the ADU, so that we're not having to put in a new power service? Can we utilize the existing sewer connection? If you're on a septic, is the septic tank large enough in order to support an additional bedroom connection to the sewer unit? And the reason why we look at that is cost. Because if I can do a sub panel versus a new panel, I'm going to reduce my cost. In the area where we're at here in Phoenix, a new ADU is somewhere between $175 and $225 a square foot, because you got to put in, your foundation, you got sewer connections, and if you can utilize an existing sewer connection, now I don't have a new connection to the city services, which can be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 just to make the connection. If I can utilize an existing panel, that may save $5,000 to $7,000 for me on building an ADU and lower my price per square foot. And then of course it depends on how all out you're going to go. Or are you going to do tile floors or luxury vinyl? Or are you going to do granite countertops? All those kind of things. But you can make an ADU, an additional dwelling unit, very reasonable per square foot compared to what we normally find when we're developing a new home on a new lot. In fact, is what we're looking at now in our projects that we have going right now is we're building the main houses right now, but we're not putting the additional dwelling units on them. But we have allowed the lot space to be where we can do that most cost effectively in the future, if we choose, and laid out in such a way that with zoning that we know that we'll have the least resistance in our permitting applications. So there are some cost considerations to consider when you're doing these additional dwelling units, because you can phase them in. If you know what your build cost is, you can phase them in. If you are going to do an additional dwelling unit, you want it to have its own power meter, you want it to have its own sewer connection, you want it to have its own water connection. And if you're developing a lot, maybe you put those stub-ins in initially while you're already making the connection to the city to save money down the road, so you don't have to go back and make a new connection when you're putting those in. So there's a lot of those kind of considerations that you can think about when you're doing your additional dwelling units. And obviously, depending on the size of the lot space you have, if you have an acre lot and you're talking, you have a smaller house, your jurisdiction may allow a larger additional dwelling unit, and you could get potentially 1,000, 1,500 square foot ADU if you wanted to. If you're in the co-living market, it's a good way to break that into a couple different additional paid units for you. So I mean, those are things to take into consideration when you're investing in this, and how ADUs can advance your objectives with investing. So what are the dollar benefits? I think that when we look at it, if you're a buy and hold investor, it's all about maximizing the returns. And I always say that if you can turn an equal or better return rate by adding square footage, then you always should. And generally, when we're looking at houses, if we buy a 3-1, we're always looking at how can I make this into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. If I buy a 2-1, how can I make it a 2-bedroom, 2-bath? Or how can I make it a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Or if I'm doing it on the co-living side of the space, I'm looking how can I turn this 3-bedroom into a 6-bedroom? But, and how can I add an additional bathroom without taking away bedroom space or an ADU helps to do that and helps to further our return on and maximize our return on profit on our investment with elevated profits on the additional square footage that we get. And when we're flipping, we're kind of looking at the same thing. We're looking at can we derive more than a dollar for dollar return on investment? I mean, because if we're doing a flip and I can add 1,000 square foot to the property in the form of an ADU, and it's going to cost me, $175 a square foot, so that's $175,000. Will it bring more than $175,000 value to my flip? Now, if I'm doing an attached, maybe I can cut the cost down into $100 per square foot because I'm not pouring on, I'm not having to do maybe my own new foundation. Maybe there's already a foundation and footer in there and it was a storage unit or something else, and non-livable space I can turn into a livable space. So we're always looking at that. Where can we get more than a dollar for dollar return on investment? Or how will this upgrade, how will this addition add to bringing a faster selling time to the property and increase our margins? And I think ADUs have a role to play in that, and there's some substantial benefits that we can derive with these additional dwelling units. So my final thoughts is take into consideration how you can maximize the space, how an additional dwelling unit may benefit you in your investing goals. Not every property, not every investment we make, whether it's a buy and hold property we acquire, not every flip that we acquire, does it make sense to do an additional dwelling unit. But there are the ones that it makes sense and it can really add to your bottom line. So I think it's something that you should consider on every one, even if you don't pull the trigger on every one of those. Hey, I want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Be sure to check out our growing list of previous episodes of other real estate investing topics. I invite you also to subscribe today and be part of our growing community. You can always find the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts. This is Scott Whitwam. Be sure to join me on our next episode of the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast, where we're wealth building through real estate.